Said. We'll go ahead and get started today. And I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about for the first month or so for the year. And generally in this time, the first month, we do a lot of prayer at the district level, at the pastoral level, at the ministry leaders level. So I wanted to kind of encourage you guys as well to just seek more of God's presence and communicate with God more. It should be throughout the whole year, but right now should be when we should be putting a greater emphasis on that. As we start this year, we want to include God in our plans and petition and plead with God and speak with God. And it'll set like a foundation for the rest of the year. So really what prayer is just people talking to God. Because I remember when I was a young person, I was so like lost, I guess I can say, when it talked about prayer. Sometimes I thought I was just speaking to myself. Sometimes I didn't even know what I was doing or what to ask for. So if for some of you guys, this might be very simple. For others, it might be a reminder. If not, then this will be new to you and you will begin to practice prayer. So we'll talk about that, and it'll be a couple of weeks or so that we talk about prayer as we encourage you guys to pray with us. So I want to front load this as before we get into prayer, what it is that you're doing when you're talking to God. So it's who you're talking to. Now, we look at God biblically as a creator, almighty, all-knowing, immense in how he is, in all that he is. And he creates the universe. He creates humans with a reason and a purpose to be to relate with him, to be in communion with him. So we see God and his greatness, and then we look at ourselves so little, so insignificant, yet this person, this God, wants to speak and communicate with us. So that's kind of like a little a preface, so to speak, as to why we pray. So you know who God is and what is happening there when you communicate with him. So when we talk with God, one of the things I used to think about is like, well, why do we pray? If God already knows what my heart is and what I'm going to say, well, why do we pray? And it's a very much a limited way of looking at prayer. Our perspective about prayer was very limited. It was for myself when I was in high school and in college. I limited what I thought about prayer. So through this, I hope so we can expand our knowledge and grow deeply in communion with God. So if you could put Matthew 6:8 up there. And we'll be reading the portion in the Bible, in the Gospels, where Jesus shows us how to pray. And it starts with this part. And this is where I'll ask you guys to stay, and we'll jump to one more verse, but this is where we will begin. It starts in Matthew 6:8, and it says, "Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." So it's knowing the ability of God in all his knowingness, all his lovingness, and all his sovereignty, that he's ultimately on control, is that when he's talking here to not be like them, he's talking about the pagans and the people that would just blabber, I guess you could say. Because I remember one time when I was in football in high school, we would always say the Lord's Prayer, and that's this section here where it's the Lord's Prayer, and I would think like, in my way, conformed with the way that people thought about prayer. Because even though all these kids in football are cussing, speaking badly about women, and then doing bad in school, not respecting authority, and so forth, we would always do the Lord's Prayer before every football game. And I found it kind of like weird because it's kind of conforming to the way the world thinks about it. It's like, okay, yeah, we can be Christian, we could believe in God, but then we can still do whatever the heck we want. But it isn't as such. Because here is telling them, do not be like them. Do not just blabble and say things as if you were the pagans. Because to me, that's what I look back as to now. Because these people weren't genuinely Christian or even had a relationship. They were just speaking these words because they thought it sounded cool or because it's tradition and so forth to say the Lord's Prayer before every football game. And now when I kind of watch football, I see some football players from both teams getting together in the very center and they're praying. And I find it kind of curious because I think those, at least through their fruits, are showing that whether they win or lose, they're still giving the glory to God. Something that I was just kind of thinking about right now, as to the reflection of where their stance in the prayer, that they're just not like everybody else, just following the motion or doing as they do. But even through whatever happened, whatever occurrence, that they are still there on their knees, even with the opposing team, the enemy, as you can say, and still saying, hey, let's get together and glorify God publicly on national television. So I find that amazing. But this morning, I wanted to talk about 4 things that prayer accomplishes. So as we go in this first month, and as we encourage you guys to pray, I'm going to give you those 4 whys. Why should I pray? Or what does it do? And I'm going to give you 4 reasons. So the first part is that prayer expresses our trust in God. And you can leave that verse up there, but I'll just mention this verse here quickly. And it says in Matthew 21, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer. That's loaded with if you believe. Now, what does if you believe mean? Well, do you believe that God exists? Do you believe that God answers your prayers? Do you believe that he's listening to you? Do you believe that you're saved through the blood of Christ on the cross? It's all that if you believe. Before he says, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer. And when you start to believe God, and you understand his purposes and his will over your life, what you ask isn't for things of this world. You start to ask God for salvation. You start to ask God for peace. You start to ask God for sanity, for things that to some people are like whatever, but things that matter most is that you could rest in the presence of God and have peace. So that is why this is important, because prayer will express your trust in God. If you guys trust God this year, will you pray those things to him? Will you believe? Whatever it may be, whether it's your marriage, your finances, will you pray, God, give me the desire to pray? Because I wake up in the mornings and that's the last thing I want to do. Will you give me that desire? Will you grow that in my heart? To seek you first thing in the morning. So that's why it's important, because God delights in being trusted. So when you have faith, God delights in that. Because he's seeing that you're taking God into account for your plans. Because this is the beginning of the year. Some of you guys are thinking like ahead, or what school am I going to go to, or my work, or am I going to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because we have a relatively young crowd here, or am I going to get married this year? It's things that we consider and think about. And then when you ask God and you involve him in those plans, ultimately you want God's will to be done, because my will and my purposes are going to be at the bottom level corrupt and deceitful. That's why I ask God, help me to change my ways, to include your ways, because sometimes I fool myself with some of the things that I want. I think I want this, the next day I want something else. But God, your will and your plans are perfect. So we look at this year and we pray. We say, God, let your will be done. Whatever occurs through the good times, through the bad times, God, I'm praying that ultimately that you're glorified in all situations, no matter what, regardless of how I may feel, how emotionally I may feel, how spiritually I might go through a spiritual rut where I just feel down. God, I give you the glory because ultimately you're in control. And I believe that you will bring me out of that. So prayer expresses our trust in God. It's a quality of connecting with God. And when you start to pray, God really starts to feel like, or at least from what we could see, that we're keeping him in account. We're keeping him involved in our prayers. I have here, sometimes years can pass before we understand God's wisdom, and somewhat may seem like an unanswered prayer. Because when I used to pray, I used to feel like, man, what's the point? I don't hear a response. I don't hear an answer. But sometimes it will take years before you understand why God didn't answer that prayer, or why, or if you didn't discern God's answer. Because sometimes we pray and we don't hear or understand or discern something. Sometimes it's coming before God's presence in silence. We have this whole month of prayer, and I sit right there where Juanito's sitting, and I get on my knees and I start praying. And the first 5 minutes, I'm kind of just taking the clutter out of my mind. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, and I find myself getting distracted, but I'm building the habit of talking with God. of cleansing. God, help me to pray. And I'm finding myself sitting there and I'm praying for you guys, praying for the youth leaders, the deacons, the ministry leaders, the media team, the pastoral team, and the congregation. So it sometimes, like I said, it could take years to understand that. And now, years later, though, I find myself now, is that all those prayers, I know God heard them. It took me a while to understand them, but it's brought me to this moment in time where I'm more closely in my relationship with God. So it's not to discourage you young people. If you pray and you feel like God isn't there, trust me, God is listening. But the more you talk to him, the more easier it becomes to understand and discern God's presence. So when you find yourself praying and it's like cluttering your mind, okay, I got a quote, I guess you can say, from this guy that wrote The Hidden Life in Prayer. And he says, pray until you pray. And I was like, you know what? That's so right. Because sometimes I find myself praying and I'm not really praying. I just find myself just sitting there and just kind of thinking to myself. And prayer can be different than meditating or what you meditate on. But that you would pray. And I like what he says, pray until you pray. Because eventually you start to get the hang of it. You start to, okay. And then we're going to read right now the example that Jesus gives us in the Gospels. But you pray, and you pray, and you pray. So that's the first one. Prayer expresses our trust in God, and God delights in knowing that he's being trusted. The second, prayer expresses our dependence on God. And this is where we're going to read the Lord's Prayer. So go to 6:9. And it reads, "This then is how you should pray, giving us an example. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread and forgive us of our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." Here, we kind of have to place our minds in the Jews' perspective here, because when he's talking to them and he says, "Our Father," it's kind of like different, because when the Jews in the Old Testament were looking at prayer, it's such a holy thing. It's such a like, dude, we can't even be in the presence. Only the priest can talk to him. And then yet when Jesus is saying "Our Father," saying us as a community, and saying the word Father means something so intimately, that as I was to speak to my actual physical father, biological father. And in that closeness of someone that knows you so well, it's an open relationship. Communication is back and forth. So the Jew kind of finds himself there like a little bit shocked. You mean our Father? Like, yes, he is our Father, our creator. We are his creation. And then they find themselves there like, okay, this is a little bit more intimate than someone anticipated or expected. So it's kind of giving you that a little bit of deeper perspective when we say "Our Father," that intimacy is there when you speak with them in prayer. Not as just some creator, all-knowing, almighty God, as he is, distant from us, but also relational, as you would speak to your father or mother or your mentor or your best friend or so forth. So God Almighty, a sovereign of the universe, created and governs and will judge all things as he is our Father. So it's kind of like I was mentioning, as crazy as that thought is, that God, the creator, judges all things, governs all things, he's in complete control, yet we have that immense, intimacy with God when we speak to him and we acknowledge him as our Father. Not just my Father, but our Father. So when we pray, I guess you could say corporately, because we're as a group, as the Bible, as a church, as beloved children, as we are. So prayer marked by close relationship. So in this prayer, we find that it's a close relationship. He's our Father. It shows reverence, because we're talking about his kingdom, his will in heaven, his authority descending down to earth, and having that will of God's over ours. So as we find ourselves this year, 2019, we might start on our feet with our egos. God, I want to do this year. When in reality, we should have reverence. Begin this year on our knees and tell God, have your way this year. God, your plans and your purposes, I want that this year. And at any moment I find myself doing things that I want without your provision, your protection, your guidance through the Holy Spirit, then God, bring me to correction. So I'm back into submission. So there's a lot of reverence, there's submission in our prayers, and there's trust and dependence. Because we're trusting in God when we ask, God, forgive me of my sins. And we're trusting in God when we say, help me to forgive others. Because that part about debt is that we're in debt to God because we owe something to God because we're His. Yet in our offense and in our sin separates us from that. So we find ourselves, in prayer, okay, reverence. I need to have reverence. I need to have trust. I need to have dependence on anything that happens. Ultimately, it's going to be your will and your promises that are going to be done. It's kind of like a shift as to what the world tries to promote at the beginning of the year. Oh, it's the new year. It's the new year. You try and do this, try that, accomplish this. And they push the ego, the pride. You can do this. In reality, for the Christian and for us, it's the opposite. We start on our knees. All pastors, all ministry leaders. We have quite a big group here at 5 o'clock in the morning praying for you guys. And the first thing we do when we walk in here, we get on our knees and we plead and communicate and we pray with God and we talk with Him. So this is all to encourage you guys to do the same as a congregation. Because don't leave that responsibility just to the pastor or to, he's my God, but He's also your God too. I speak to the same person you speak to, except my dialogue is open because I understand it. It is yours. Sometimes you need to check that. How well is your communication with God? Because all prayer is talking with God. In simplistic terms, you are talking to God. So young people, don't get confused. Don't get discouraged. Don't stop. But we implore you, we encourage you to begin to pray. Even if it's just a couple of seconds in the morning of your waking mind, God, I thank you this morning. Your breath of life sustains me. I pray that your provision continues to be over me, covers me, and guide me the steps of my day, my path. Because one step could lead me down a path of bad decisions, or one step could lead me in your protection and your guidance. And I want that to be guided by you. Kind of like very deep when you start to think about it. Psychologically almost. Because you're involving God in your mind and your decisions and your plans. So I encourage you to do that as well. Hearing well, because Jesus is telling us how we should pray. It isn't so much sometimes about what you say. I really feel it's about the heart. Because I wrote down in here that all lips, no mind, and no heart are into it. Meaning that it's not so much like the longevity of your prayers. Like, if I pray an hour long, God's going to hear me or so forth. No, it's about what's truly in your heart. What's weighing heavy in your heart. What is it that bugs you? What is it that is just like you're struggling with? How honest, transparent can you be with God? Because I hope all of you guys have ambitions for this year. Are you including God in that? Are you being transparent? Because when I was a lot younger, I would limit God in all that space. I don't want to do things on my own accord. And then when it was time to be here on Sundays, okay, and then I include God. And then when church ended, then I cut him back out. It was like back and forth, playing a game with God. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we have to have our heart in it. Prayer requires more of the heart than the tongue. Because right now we're talking about prayer expresses our dependence of God. So in your heart, find that. deeply, deeply look in your heart and ask God. Because when I look at my heart, I don't like what I see. I'll be straight honest with you. When I look at my mind, all the evil thoughts I've had, all the intrusion of things that I think about, I have to snip it in the bud. I have to tell God, take this away from me. And I know I'm not the only one in here. Even though I'm the only one talking, I know I'm not the only one in here. Because sometimes our thoughts can lead us into places that lead us into bad decisions. So another area that we should pray about is God, guide our thoughts and guide our hearts, protect them. And that weighs more than what you say physically with the tongue, because you're placing your heart before God. Charles Spurgeon, he has this to say about prayer. Christians' prayers are measured by weight, not by length. Many of the most prevailing prayers have been as short as they were strong. So as they were short, they were strong. Sometimes it's just about falling on your knees and saying, God, help me. I'll help you with what? I don't know, God. I just know that I need your help. And it's that. And then God's like, okay, I feel the stress in your heart, the pain, the weariness. And that's what it comes down to. That your heart, don't think as a prayer, as a challenge, like, oh, it's so boring. I have to pray for half an hour. Here, we're here for an hour at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I encourage you guys to come. I've seen a couple of youth leaders, a couple of ministry leaders. I encourage you guys to come. But don't think of it as a length type of deal, but really as what's in your heart. And sometimes it could be as short as 30 seconds. And start every day. Every day, start. We're starting this year heavily focused on prayer, but every day for the rest of the year, just take a couple seconds. On your drive home, you start to realize that where you go is where you take your altar, where you take your sanctuary. Because the church isn't just between these four walls, it's where you go. So your altar is at your workplace, your altar is at your school. Because when you start the day with the presence of God, you start to realize that the presence of God never left you. You start to have that little bit of discernment that when you go anywhere in the marketplace or at school or work, you start to realize that God is always with you. And He's guiding those steps. No matter where you are, God is going to be with you. He's not going to forsake you. And you are there and you find yourself in the presence of God everywhere you go. Third, prayer brings us, oh man, it's already 10:30. All right, we'll try to get through one or two more of these and then we'll come to a close. Third, prayer brings us into deeper fellowship with God. Deeper fellowship with God. So you don't know who God is? Start to pray. Start to discern, understand. And one good advice or tip I can give you guys here is to read a passage of the Bible in the morning. A verse, 2 verses, 3, or a chapter, however long you want to read. And then pray about that. And then be like, okay, God, speak to me. Help me understand your word. Because that's what the Bible is God's revelation to His people. And we read that and we pray about it. So that's a tip there. But prayer brings us into deeper fellowship with God. Like I was mentioning earlier, that sometimes it just takes a couple minutes for me to just clear my mind before I can talk with God. But nonetheless, I find myself digging deeper in prayer. And I'm like, okay, God, help me. Help me to focus. And then sometimes it's good just to be in silence. Because sometimes you guys give God a grocery list of things to do. God, I need you to do this year. I need this, and that. And it isn't like that. Sometimes it is good to be just in silence before God. And let God speak. Let God restore. Let God heal your heart, your mind. And sometimes that silence is that little bit of peace you need to start your day, start your year, start your life as you come before God. So we ask God to quiet our heart, quiet our minds in this deeper fellowship with God. And it transfers over to our daily lives. Kind of like I was mentioning that when you find that peace in that morning, you find yourself just a little bit more peaceful throughout the day. That you're not yelling at your employees that hard. Some of you guys are laughing. You know, you're not speaking bad ill wills on people or sign language, as I mentioned before when I drive. But he's just, okay. And man, this is such a test. This is such a difficult thing to do. But when I pray, I find myself that it becomes a little bit easier. Because it's not on my own will, it's not on my own strength, but it's upon my dependence upon God. And my relationship is deepening with God. And I begin to understand. And sometimes, and when I pray, I don't look for a straight away answer. I don't wait for the audible voice of God to open through the heavens and give me a clear yes or a clear no. I just have that faith in God that, hey, you're in control. And I put these things in your hands, and I know what happens or what occurs is I'm going to be satisfied and content with it. I might not like it sometimes, but I'm going to be satisfied and content with it no matter what. The fourth one, since we're going to go through this quickly, prayer allows us to be involved in activities that are eternally significant. So when we pray, we're including ourselves in these things that have an eternal significance. Because when we pray for someone and they receive Jesus, that's an eternity that you were involved in. Someone's life was changed. When you pray for someone's marriage is restored. When you pray for healing, if God gives you the gift of healing, God bless you, someone is healed. And it comes with that trust and that faith we talked about with that first Bible verse, if you believe. So we see ourselves that we have kind of like, not a job, but we have a participation in the eternal things. So if you think, for what or why, or you think you're worthless, and you don't do nothing, remember that you are participating in an eternal kingdom when you pray. How great is that? How privileged is that? That we are considered and seated next to God in heaven. And our prayers are there. And Jesus, I already talked about Jesus interceding for us, and he's constantly praying for us in heaven. But we're involved in that when we pray. Kind of like in awe, or we're left in amazement of our participation in the kingdom. And I have this, and we'll do just one example. But go to Exodus 32 or put them on the screens. I had a few examples here, but we'll just do one, and then we'll close shortly after that. Even though there's plenty of examples in the Bible of how people talked with God and participated and kind of changed the course of events. And this is where Moses is praying with God. And this is God frustrated with this people. I know God has been frustrated with me, so people prayed that God wouldn't smite me, so I thank you for those prayers. But we'll read it here in Exodus 32:9. Right? Yeah. I have seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord. Moses pleaded with God because God was about to smite these people because he was frustrated and they have angered a holy, righteous God. But Moses was pleading with God. And let's see what happens. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it is with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. So Moses is appealing to God. What's occurring here? Where did I stay? 13, right? Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. 14. Then the Lord relented and did not bring his own people the disaster he had threatened. So I don't want to say that because you gotta kind of have to be a little bit careful when we talk about this, because it's not like you say something to God and then God kind of just like does what you want. No, God had already knew in his foreknowledge and his all-knowingness that Moses would pray and pray for his people but he would be involved in that. So when we pray and we plead with God, ultimately God's will and purposes are going to be done. But it takes our involvement and our participation for that change in that event to occur. Because God had knew that he was going to bring Jesus through the Israelites, through that nation. But it took the participation and the calling of Moses to be involved in that. So we have Moses pleading and appealing to God, telling him, think about when was the last time you pleaded with God. And maybe you haven't, because you haven't been brought to your deathbed, so to speak. Or moments in your life where you felt the most despair and you felt tired and you just didn't know how you were going to make it. Man, do I wish in those moments that I felt in the past if I had God. Because I wouldn't have looked for other resources or other outlets or other people, found other things. But if I would have just knew that to pray and trust in God, that ultimately that the benefit of God will be good for my will, for my life. Does that make sense? That when we plead with God, we are involved in the things that last in eternity. So don't think that your prayers are just insignificant. But God is waiting to hear those prayers because he's waiting to do those plans, to fulfill those promises in your life. But yeah, we kind of put a stop to that. We say, maybe not today. 2019, maybe not this year. Maybe next year. I found myself like that for the longest. I grew up in the church. I'm the pastor's kid. So it took me like 20-something years before I was like, okay, maybe this year, God. But all along, God had promises for me that I delayed. Make sense? So young people, don't delay that. Pray. Involve God. I got some prayer petitions from some of you guys. You guys one of them was like, I don't know what to do in my life. I'm like, well, maybe you should start praying about it. Obviously, that's for me to pray for you, and I'm gladly will be involved in your prayer, and I will intercede for you. But the good thing is that youth now is finally thinking, okay, I need to start praying about my future as they graduate this year. So something to consider. Why wait? Why not start when you're in 9th grade or earlier? God, I put my high school years in your hands. I put my college years in your hands. I put my future marriage, whoever that person may be, in your hands. I pray for my future kids. Who knows if I'm even going to have any. But if it's your will, God willing, God, you will give me those kids. And my future grandkids and my descendants. May they be blessed by your name. So we consider God in all things. And we'll skip all this and I'll just remind you why we pray or what prayer accomplishes. Prayer expresses our trust in God. Prayer expresses our dependence on God. Prayer brings us into deeper fellowship with God. Prayer allows us to be involved in activities that are eternally significant. So those are what prayers accomplish. So if you want to pray this year, I encourage you, please pray and know why you pray or for what. Because the for what means, what's going to happen? Well, this is what it accomplishes. You want to grow in your communion with God this year? Begin to pray. Make sense? Some of you guys are kind of nodding. Can I just get everyone to say yes? Okay. Let's stand up and let's pray.